Hi, I'm here today with Dr. Frances Duffy from 60 Dementia. Frances, thank you so much for speaking with us today. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, hi, Rosie. My name's Frances Duffy, and I'm a consultant clinical psychologist. I'm an NHS clinical entrepreneur and founder and CEO of 60 Dementia. And I've been working in dementia care for over 15 years.
Brilliant. And could you tell us a bit more about what 60 Dementia is and what led you to set it up?
Yeah, so 60 is a framework to help us to understand dementia and to understand the whole person with dementia. And the way we think about dementia in 60 is think about the six dimensions of dementia. And they are physical health and well-being, life story, emotional well-being, activity, safety, and the environment. And wrapped around all of these six dimensions is cognition. And what we're really saying in 6D is that the person with dementia is asking us to please see me. So see the whole person without the label of dementia. And we offer a range of training programs within 60 to help caregivers and health and care staff to better understand dementia and to try to see the world from the perspective of the person with dementia, to help them to offer care and support in a way that helps the person to feel safe and respected.
It's really beautiful. And it sounds like a really sort of holistic understanding of what it means to have dementia and what it means to recognize that person's needs. Um, how do you think we can actually better identify the unmet needs that people living with dementia might have?
I think whenever we think about dementia and we think about the needs of a person with dementia, we all have the same needs. And a person who happens to have a diagnosis with dementia is no different from us. They have the same needs as we do. So when I try to think about what it is that I need in my life, I want to be healthy, I want to be happy, I want to be independent and make my own decisions. And that's exactly the same as a person with dementia. So if we just think about the fact, well, what are the needs of a person? Then that really is the answer for that question for us. So, is the person physically well? How are we treating any physical health conditions that they have? Um, do they present as being happy? But if they're not presenting as being happy and content, then we probably just need to pause and think about it. Well, what might be going on for that person that we may need to change in order to help them to meet their needs? If they can't verbally communicate what their needs are, then it's up for us to kind of to have a look at what that person's day is like, what their environment's like, and think about whether or not there's something that they may need and how can we support them to meet that need.
And are there sort of common misunderstandings about dementia that you see quite commonly in care settings or in family members of people living with dementia that you'd be keen to try and clarify?
Yeah, I think we make a range of assumptions about people whenever we know little about them. And I think it's very easy for us to jump in and make assumptions about someone because they have a diagnosis of dementia. And it may be that we assume that that person can't understand, or we assume that there's things that that person can't do. And it's very easy for us to do this, particularly if the person doesn't have good verbal communication. But it's also really important to recognize is that everybody with a diagnosis of dementia is very different. So no two people with dementia are the same in the same way as none of us are the same. So you and I are very different in terms of our likes and dislikes, in terms of our interests. And people with dementia are exactly the same. And there are over 200 different types of dementia. And the different types of dementia really will determine what parts of the brain are damaged for the person and what their kind of strengths and weaknesses are. So I think the first thing that I would say is don't jump to assumptions whenever you hear that someone has dementia or you engage with someone who has a dementia. And whenever we talk to families, families will often say, whenever the person has been diagnosed with dementia, that visitors stop coming, that people don't visit anymore. And this sometimes is because people can find it quite uncomfortable and they may not know what to say or how to engage with a person with dementia, particularly if they have difficulty with verbal communication. But there's lots of different ways in which we can communicate. So we would kind of give advice is that think about how you can engage with a person without using verbal communication. Can you support them to look at photographs? Can you play games with them? Is there other things that you can do to enjoy that interaction? So I suppose the first thing is I would say is don't assume anything. Meet the person as they are in front of you rather than thinking about that label.
That's a really, really powerful argument that there really isn't a one size fits all approach to this. It's very much, who is the person that sat in front with me? How can I engage with them as they are with me today? How do you think language can shape our understanding of dementia? I know sometimes there's a phrase around sort of challenging behavior, which is sometimes used. How do you feel about that phrase, and how do you think we can perhaps better use language to describe?
Yeah, I absolutely hate that phrase, challenging behavior. And I think whenever I hear that phrase, challenging behavior, I think, well, who's that behavior challenging for? And what is the actual behavior? Because if we think about someone with dementia, they're the same as all of us. They're trying to negotiate and navigate through their world and try and make sense of what's happening around them. And sometimes, because of their dementia, they've got more difficulty understanding what's happening. And just take, for an example, a behavior that's frequently referred to as challenging is, let's say you're lying in bed this morning and two strangers come into your room and they start to remove your clothing. You'd be terrified and you'd wonder what's happening. And you would act in ways to defend yourself. You'd probably shout out, you'd probably lift your hand to actually get them to go away and to stop. And that's a normal reaction. But what we have is every day of the week, tens of thousands of people living with dementia have people coming into their homes to offer support with personal care. And they've got two strangers who enter into their personal space and approach them and start to remove their clothing. But when that person does exactly what we would do and they shout out or they resist, that behavior is labeled as challenging. So, what I would say is whenever we see a person with dementia who's distressed or they're doing something that we don't fully understand, then we need to think about it. What does that feel like for that person? What might their perspective of this situation be? And how can we engage with them in a way that helps them to feel safe and respected? So, I suppose the idea of challenging behavior is I'm not really sure what that sort of concept means in terms of who is it challenging for. And I think a big concern, I think, is that whenever we see people engaging in these behaviors and caregivers don't understand, then the person's prescribed psychotropic medications that have got really significant side effects. So I suppose what we're thinking about is saying, look at the perspective of the person and what might be going on for them.
I really like that as a very empathy driven approach, really trying to put yourself in the position of that person. And as you say, like if there were strangers coming into my room, I would be really scared and I would react to that. And I think, I love that empathy first approach and trying to shift our language away from challenging behavior. Something else that you work on it is, I suppose, trying to move beyond just providing safety and care living with dementia and actually going beyond that and thinking about how we can support autonomy and promote joy as well. How do you think we can best go about that?
Yeah, I think we're kind of very much moving towards a very risk averse lifestyle. And I think, particularly when someone is diagnosed with a cognitive impairment, then we tend to be much more kind of risk averse. But I think we really need to support people to live their lives in the way that they would choose to live their lives. We need to give people access to the things that they enjoy doing and understand their kind of likes and dislikes. But we need to think about, why are we risk averse? And if I think of an example of, let's say you've got a lady or a gentleman who's got impaired mobility and they're sitting in a chair and they frequently attempt to mobilize independently. And we complete a risk assessment and we say, they're at risk of falling if they mobilize independently. And then we can end up engaging in sometimes restrictive practices where if the person tries to mobilize, we ask them to sit down or, we engage in other ways. But what I would say is, let's think about that. Well, first of all, why would a person want to mobilize from their chair? And you think about it, we get up and we walk around independently whenever we want. But if you've got impaired mobility and you're not able to get up and walk around, every so often, you're going to want to get up and do something. You may want to go to the bathroom, you may be hungry and want something to eat, or you just might want a change of scenery. So what we'd think about is, rather than thinking about some of the risks, is to make sure is the person got enough to engage them with? So if someone is, unable to mobilize independently, can we ensure that they've got lots of activity and variety throughout the day? Because that will reduce the risk of them wanting to mobilize independently if we can support them to go outside for a while, to change location, or to give them activity. So I think, yes, of course, we have to keep people safe, but we also need to think about the quality of life and the things that are important to people.
And I know there's been a lot of discussion around this concept of person-centered care, and perhaps it's become a little bit of a buzzword, but what do you think good person-centered care actually looks like in practice, in a real and meaningful way?
Yeah, person-centered care is a word that is used a lot. And I think we don't really stop to think about what does it really mean to offer person-centered care. And the key really is in the name, the person. And in order to offer anybody person-centered care, we need to understand who they are, because my likes and dislikes, my strengths and weaknesses are different than yours and different from other people's. And the same is true with a person with dementia. So if we know what that person likes, what they don't like, if we know what their strengths are and we know what their weaknesses are, then we can support them in a way that compensates for any of their weaknesses by using their strengths. So, really understanding someone's unique life history and how they like to be supported, how they like to be approached, what they like to be called. These are all things that are really important within person centered care. And it's even small things like as much as a cup of tea. If we surveyed like 100 people, they would all tell us something different about the way that they like their tea. So I suppose even a very simple thing in terms of person centered care is, do you know how that person with dementia that you're caring for likes to have their tea? Do they like it milky? Do they like it with sugar? Do they like it weak or strong? So all of these tiny things that we can do to really actually offer care to the person as opposed to a person with dementia is really, really important.
And how do you think technology, for example, film resources or videos, might be able to be used to help support the needs of people living with dementia?
Yeah, I think there are some really great advances in technology that can actually be used to support people with dementia. And I think one of the things that I think is really important in good dementia care is to, I suppose for me, is to step back and look at what the person's day is like. So when I think about what does that person do from they wake up in the morning until they kind of go to bed at night, do they have variety in their day? Do they have purpose? Is there a reason for them to get out of bed? Do they feel respected by other people around them? And one of the things that is really important within that is to make sure there's a range of activities throughout the day to make sure there's routine and predictability. And as part of that, then we can use things like technology to support us. So, for example, can we use tablets to help people play, games, or to use the tablet to access contact with family and friends? Can we support them to watch TV programs that they enjoy, programs that are suitable to their ability to engage with those programs and enjoy them? Can we support them to listen to music or sing along to music? And that's in addition to other activities that the person might engage in, whether that's physical movement or support to go outside or interacting with things in their environment. So we can use, various technology, even things like to support where someone is, where they're moving about in a house to ensure they're safe. There's GPS. So there's lots of different technologies out there that can actually help people to be as independent as possible for as long as possible.
It's really interesting hearing you speak about thinking about the person first and thinking about their autonomy and giving them choices and trying to anticipate what they might need or things that they might enjoy. And I think that's something that we really try and think about with My Love TV, our dementia-friendly streaming service. We really try and have a wide range of activities on there so that there is something for everyone, be that dementia-friendly quizzes or chair yoga that kind of helps people to stay active whilst also being mindful of the fact that some people might be quite frail and might fall. So I think that's really, really interesting. And as I say, it's something that we really try and provide with our service by having a range of materials on there. And really also just fundamentally, and I think it's come through in everything that you've said today, just remembering that people are people at the end of the day, regardless of whether or not they've got dementia. People are people and they're going to have their own interests and their own wants and their own needs. And I think respecting that personhood is of the utmost importance throughout this.
Yep. And I think just kind of building on what you've said is that my experience of caregivers and health and care staff is that they want to do the right thing. You know, people care, offer care to others because it's like a vocation. It's what they want to do, or they're caring for someone that they love. And in order for people, though, to provide the best care, they really need to have a greater understanding of dementia. Because sometimes, if we don't fully understand dementia, then we can actually respond to that person in ways that increase their distress without realizing, too, we want to do the right thing. But if we don't know what the right thing is, then sometimes, without realizing, we do things that actually aren't as helpful as they could be. And that's what we try to do within 6D, is we try to help people to see the perspective of the person with dementia so that they can offer that care and support in a way that reduces any potential distress. And that not only reduces stress for the person with dementia, but also reduces caregiver stress and burnout.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Frances. It's been so interesting speaking with you today. I really appreciate your time. So yes, thank you so much. That was Dr. Frances Duffy from 6D Dementia, speaking with me, Rosie Collier, Head of Content at My Life Savings.
Thank you.